Hello, welcome to this Christmas Carol revision session focusing on the ghosts. Nowadays, the stereotype of Victorian Britain is one of a strict religious nation. While these ideas are not wholly incorrect, Victorian society was much more complex than this. Sitting alongside the strict religious teachings that governed so much of the Victorian era was a deep fascination for the supernatural. And ghosts became a popular feature in Victorian literature. There were varying beliefs of ghosts when it came to the Church's teachings. The Catholic Church suggested ghosts were disturbed spirits whose souls were trapped in purgatory, a place that was neither heaven nor hell. They could not be granted eternal rest because of the sins that they had committed in life. Purgatory was a place where the souls of sinners were held while they atoned for their mortal sins. The Protestant Church had a different view of the subject of ghosts. The elite and important members of society followed the beliefs of the Protestant Church. They regarded Catholic ideas of ghosts as frauds who were masters of deceiving people. Instead, Protestant teaching said good souls went directly to heaven and bad souls directly to hell, leaving no room for ghosts to exist or disrupt the mortal world. Dickens himself held Christian beliefs. However, as a young man, and remember Dickens was only just into his 30s when he wrote A Christmas Carol, he was staunchly opposed to the idea of organised religion. Dickens seems to have disliked extremes of Christianity, from Roman Catholicism to evangelism to, perhaps interestingly given the subject of this revision video, spiritualism. For Dickens, Christianity was progressive. He believed the word of the Bible was not finite and ought to be read in the context of the world inhabited by its readers, to ensure the spirit of Christianity was never lost. And the spirit of Christianity certainly fills A Christmas Carol, and many, many other of Dickens' works. So the first ghost that we meet comes in stave 1, and that is Jacob Marley. And the very first line of this novel gives us a clue to the ghost of Jacob Marley being a prominent feature of the text. The very first line reads, "Marley was dead," to begin with. And that second clause there is a clue that he is not done on this planet to begin with. Instantly, Dickens is insinuating that this is going to be a ghost story, that the potential for ghosts will arise. This isn't just going to be a happy Christmas scene, as people had seen in previous essays from Dickens. There is something more supernatural to come. And, as foreshadowed, Jacob Marley's ghost arrives towards the end of this first stave. And Dickens describes Marley's ghost in great detail. He tells us the chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. The fact that we're told Marley is wearing a chain instantly tells us that this is a punishment, almost aligning itself with these kind of Catholic ideas of purgatory. And it's clasped about its middle. It's almost painful. There is a kind of suffering here. And it's interesting that even at this very, very early stage of the novel, Dickens tells us that Scrooge is paying close attention. Scrooge observed it closely. This is something that unsettles Scrooge. This ghost is not a pleasant visitor for Scrooge. And like we've seen in previous videos, again, Dickens goes well beyond the typical triadic list here. Cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. There are so many things on this chain around Jacob Marley. He's weighed down with the sins of his life. Dickens also tells us that Marley's body was transparent. Now, contextually, this is quite interesting because up until kind of the turn of the 1800s, 1820s, 1830s even, ghosts had typically been portrayed as kind of figures with a white sheet over them going, woo, almost that kind of stereotype of Halloween costumes. But we saw a shift in how ghosts were presented across the 19th century. And here, Marley's body is transparent. He's different. Now, transparent might mean there's no substance to him. Perhaps this is Dickens' way of suggesting that Marley spent so much time focusing on wealth that he never really built up a person, a persona, a soul. And so his time righting the wrongs of his life is his opportunity to build a soul. Speaking to Scrooge, Marley says, "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. And Scrooge replies, "I don't." Here, we're seeing early signs of Scrooge's capacity for Christian ideals to exist. He doesn't believe in ghosts. There's a suggestion that Scrooge is aware of Protestant teachings, of Anglican teachings. Dickens himself had had an Anglican upbringing. And as we've seen in other revision videos, there's a sense that Dickens is foreshadowing Scrooge's potential for change. Nevertheless, Jacob Marley is there to help make sure that happens. I wear the chain I forged in life. Marley is there to show that this is his own doing. And of course, Scrooge being Marley's business partner, Scrooge is given a very clear indication of what his afterlife might hold as well. Interestingly, we've got that verb forged, which sits quite clearly alongside wrought in an earlier quotation there. Both of them suggesting a sense of working, making, crafting, as if both of these men have deliberately crafted these lives for themselves. It's been hard work, but Dickens is suggesting that this was misplaced effort, and as a result, punishment has come. So Marley comes along and he's there to tell Scrooge of future visitors, future ghostly visitors. And so the next day takes us to meet the ghost of Christmas past. Now, the ghost of Christmas past is a ghost full of contrast and opposition. It's like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. And if you've already seen the video on Ebenezer Scrooge, this might remind you of Scrooge declaring himself quite a baby in Stave 5. He's an old man and yet he's a child. The ghost of Christmas past is Scrooge's past. It's juxtaposing, it's conflicted to show us that Scrooge is neither one thing nor the other, and again helping us understand that there is room for change. Further contrast is seen with its hair, which was white as if with age, yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. Again, we've got that sense of juxtaposition, that contrast of age and youth. And it held a branch of fresh green holly. Now, of course, in the previous stave, we'd seen Scrooge declaring that any idiot saying Merry Christmas should be buried with a stake of holly through its heart. And here, as we see with many of the ghosts, it is reminding Scrooge of mistakes he has made. In addition to holding a fresh branch of holly, from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light. And of course, light tends to symbolise vision, tends to symbolise sight, hope, possibility, life. And the fact that this is coming from the crown of its head is almost as if this ghost is here to shed light on the poor ways of thinking that Scrooge has had in his life, and to enlighten him into ways of changing his thinking. As well as this ghost's appearance being full of juxtaposition, even its actions are full of contrast. It put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. It's got a strong hand. We've got that verb clasped, which suggests strength, determination, conviction, and yet we've got the adverb gently. This ghost understands the job it's got. It recognises the importance and it's here to do it, but it recognises, as the first spirit to take Scrooge on a journey, it needs to do so with care and caution, hence the adverb gently. Scrooge is not yet fully receptive to the ideas of change. He hasn't yet seen the errors of his ways, and so compassion needs to be applied. Even though Scrooge is a man who perhaps doesn't exert compassion himself. And so that kind of stronghold of the spirit takes Scrooge through various different sites of his past, to the point that finally Scrooge is faced with Belle. He's seen Belle call off their engagement. He sees Belle living a happy life. And Scrooge finds this really, really difficult to watch. He doesn't want to keep being confronted with the errors of his ways. He asks the ghost to stop showing him these sights. It's causing him pain. It's causing him to suffer. And yet the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. And perhaps that change from the forcefulness, from the gentle to the forceful, is again a reflection of Scrooge's capacity to change. By the end of that first stave, Scrooge is understanding that some of his actions have been wrong, have been problematic, that he needs to change. And so by the end of this stave, the ghost is able to apply more force, to pinion his arms, to really hold them back, so that the physical pain Scrooge experiences prompts an emotional or a mental pain that will allow change to come. The next ghost is the ghost of Christmas Present in stave 3. Upon waking up again, a strange voice called Scrooge by his name and bade him enter. There's an authority about this ghost, much more definite than the contrasting authority of the first spirit, perhaps because Scrooge is aware of the need to change now. With each ghost, Scrooge becomes more receptive, becomes more ready for the ideas, the lessons, the change that will be put upon him. And so as Scrooge enters the room, we see great long details of the change that has taken place in his room. It was a very meagre, very melancholy, miserable room, and now the walls and ceiling were so hung with living green. Holly, there we see it again, mistletoe and ivy. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, the list goes on and on and on, that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. So again, we've got that sense of holly. Again, a reminder of Scrooge's foolish utterances in stave 1. We've got mistletoe, a plant synonymous with kissing and affection at Christmas time. We've got ivy, something that's often perceived as a weed, but it's also a symbol of strength, of fortitude, of something lasting a long time, of being difficult to get rid of. Perhaps suggesting that while Scrooge's old behaviour might have been difficult to get rid of, that was the weed in Scrooge's heart. And that he will be able to change, and the change instead will last forever in his heart. And so we are faced with a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch. Again, we've got that image of light, of enlightenment, of vision, of sight, just as with the previous spirit. But where the previous spirit was very small, very fragile, very dainty, here we've got an enormous spirit. There is no escaping the messages of this spirit, such as its sight. And yet, although it's quite an overwhelming size, the spirit's eyes were clear and kind. And as we've discussed, the eyes are often the window to the soul. And here, this spirit's eyes are clearly the window to its soul. It's very kind. It's very certain. The eyes are clear. It knows what it's here to do. But it is going to do so with compassion, just as the first spirit did. This spirit is clothed in one simple deep green robe. Potentially, we might look at connections to Saint Nick before Coca-Cola got hold of him and changed the outfit to red. And on its head, it wore no covering other than a holly wreath. Again, more holly. Here, it's got a wreath around its head. Now, we know that the wreath around its head could symbolise emperors, could symbolise, or particularly with this being holly and the kind of prickles, the prickly nature, perhaps might make us think of the crown of thorns that Jesus wore. Perhaps, again, kind of showing Scrooge the way back to Christianity and Christian teachings. For all that this spirit is kind and jolly, it's not afraid to make Scrooge reflect and to appreciate and muse on the things that make him uncomfortable. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit and was overcome with penitence and grief. This spirit is able to do the job it has come to do, just like the previous spirit. And it's able to ensure that Scrooge changes. He doesn't just hang his head, it's with penitence and grief. Scrooge feels sorry for what he's done. He acknowledges that he needs to change his behaviour, and he feels sad about his previous behaviour. The second time the spirit repeats Scrooge's words back to him is when Scrooge has seen ignorance and want under the spirit's cloak, and asking about who they are and whether there is help for them. The spirit tells Scrooge they are man's and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. On his brow I see ignorance written, which is doom. Deny it. Now the spirit is almost echoing words of Jacob Marley's from the first stanza, when Marley declares, "Mankind was my business." Now he hadn't realised that in life, but in death he has realised that. And here this spirit is telling Scrooge the exact same thing. They are man's. And they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This spirit is telling Scrooge that it is everybody's duty, it is a collective duty to look after one another, to look after those less fortunate. And the spirit is highlighting the problem with society. He's highlighting the problem of ignorance, that sense of ignoring what you don't want to understand, what you don't want to see, what you don't want to feel. But ignorance leads to doom. And that exclamation from the spirit, "Deny it," leaves a real impression on Scrooge. It's an urgent declaration. It's desperation for Scrooge to change, for Scrooge to stop being ignorant to the poverty and the hardships that surround him, even in his own office, and to do something about it. And so by the time the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come arrives, Scrooge is ready for this message. Now the previous two spirits declare their names or who they are to Scrooge. The third spirit, the final spirit, doesn't do that. The final spirit never speaks. It is Scrooge who acknowledges that he is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Dickens simply calls him the last of the spirits. But the fact that it is Scrooge that attaches this name, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, to the spirit, shows just how much he has understood these messages, shows just how in tune he is with the thinking and the teaching that they are there to do. And it shows the change, the transformation that is taking place within Scrooge. Scrooge is taking ownership of his life and the changes that must take place. This final spirit is a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. And this quotation actually comes from the end of stave 4. The other spirits have all been contained within their own stave. Jacob Marley in stave 1, the Ghost of Christmas Past in stave 2, present in stave 3. But the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come spans 2 staves, perhaps showing just how important this spirit is in bringing about the change for Scrooge. Perhaps showing just how ready Scrooge is for this change, for this final spirit to arrive and guide him. And there's something very kind of Grim Reaper like about this spirit, the hooded figure. It's very solemn, it doesn't talk, it's surrounded by mist. It's a very kind of unsettled, spooky, eerie, sinister atmosphere that surrounds this spirit. And that's very appropriate because Scrooge is a very sinister, secretive, miserable man at the start of the novel. And assuming he didn't change, this would be a very fitting spirit to come and show him his grave. But because Scrooge is ready to change, this description becomes all the more frightening for Scrooge. So he is the last of the spirits. We know that the end is drawing near. We know that Scrooge is very ready to change. He's very open to change. In fact, he's kind of shown the signs of being open to change right from the first stave. The fact that it takes until the 4th stave shows just how much needed to be changed. The fact that Dickens needs 4 sections of the novel to do that shows the enormity of how terrible Scrooge's behaviour has been. And it also allows it to be a very painful process for Scrooge. And it's important that it's painful because it's something Scrooge will not want to go through again. And so the more painful this process is for Scrooge, the more he suffers as a result, the more likely it is that he will remember this message forevermore. Now this spirit concealed its head, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. And here we're seeing a kind of connection between the spirits, because at the end of the previous stave, we saw an outstretched claw coming from the previous spirit's cloak, where we met ignorance and want. And here we've got that same sort of image. We're seeing this message connect across past, present and future, showing just how important it is that we carry our past, our present and our future in us at all times. The fact that it conceals its head, very, very different from the previous 2 spirits though, where they are full of light, they're full of guidance, they're full of wisdom. This is a much, much more bleak, much more mysterious figure. And as a result, Scrooge does fear this spectre more than any others that he's seen. But he knows that its purpose is to do him good, and he hopes to live to be another man. And so we see Scrooge acknowledge that he has a thankful heart in spite of how frightened he is. And it's interesting that we've got several different words for ghost used already: phantom, spirit, spectre, showing just how confused Scrooge's mind has become as it starts to sort out right from wrong. And we can see that he is erring towards right over wrong when he says that he's prepared to bear company and do it with a thankful heart. He's learning from all that he has already been shown. And he's even starting to emulate some of what we've seen with the Cratchits and their appreciation and their thankful hearts. He's understanding his responsibilities. And as a result, the Phantom doesn't need to say anything. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the Phantom with its outstretched hand. Scrooge is now at a point where he can do the thinking and talking himself. Unlike the previous ghosts, he doesn't need that guidance or that explicit instruction anymore. He simply needs pointing in the right direction, and he can come to these conclusions himself. So we're seeing a real change in Scrooge through the silence of this final spirit. What we might find interesting is to track the description of the Phantom's hand across this stave. We go from an inexorable finger that underwent no change to the Phantom pointed as before. Still the ghost pointed downward toward the grave. The spirit was immovable as ever. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. Very, very unsettling image, especially with the silence. And then, as Scrooge starts to fully appreciate the enormity of what his actions could mean for his future, when he sees that headstone with Ebenezer Scrooge written on it, and he truly and wholly repents, then, for the first time, the hand appeared to shake, and the Phantom's hand is described as a kind hand that trembled. So this final Phantom goes from being deeply frightening, surrounded by mist, draped, hooded, to a kind Phantom, because Scrooge's heart has changed, and so that is reflected in the appearance of this Phantom. And so Dickens tells us, holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the Phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. This final Phantom has disappeared. The ghost's teachings have worked. Scrooge has learnt his lesson and needs to be visited no more. So if we think about the purpose of the ghosts in this text, Jacob Marley acts as the messenger. He prepares Scrooge for the arrival of the three spirits, and in turn, with each impending arrival of the next spirit, Scrooge believes himself to grow more ready for each arrival, signalling the change of Scrooge's character. The three spirits reflect the emotions, the nostalgia, and the sentiment of Christmas time. This is a time of year where people do reflect on the past, on their present and their future, the things that we need to give thanks for, the things that we may need to work to change. And so the ghosts allow Dickens to interrogate what makes man act selfishly, and allows him to enlighten the reader on the way in which they can change their behaviours so that they can become more in line with the fundamental Christian teaching, love thy neighbour.